This is Nick. Welcome to GeoX, Global Intelligence Node. Today, I'm not starting with the battlefield in Ukraine. For the first time in several days, the front has remained relatively unchanged. Instead, I'm looking at something that could reshape the entire conflict. A major Western publication now argues that Vladimir Putin has only a narrow window left, until September, to change the course of the war. If that assessment is correct, the Kremlin may soon face decisions far more dangerous than anything we've seen so far. I'll explain why military analysts believe Russia could be approaching another wave of escalation, why mobilization may be much closer than many expect, and why even Moscow's closest allies appear increasingly uncertain about what comes next. I'll also examine the growing crisis around Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, the hidden problems behind Western military aid to Ukraine, new developments in space warfare, and why Europe is quietly changing its approach toward Ukrainian refugees. Some of these stories may look unrelated. I believe they're all connected. Let's begin. Good day, everyone. Today, I'm not starting with the fighting in Ukraine. For the past several days, there haven't been any major developments on the battlefield, and I've already covered the military situation in detail in my previous reports. So today, I'm starting somewhere else. The Independent, a well-known Western publication, has released an analysis claiming that Vladimir Putin has a limited window of opportunity that lasts until September. According to military analyst Robert Fox, the Kremlin believes the next 2 months could determine the outcome of the war. That's why Russia is becoming increasingly aggressive, not only toward Ukraine, but beyond its borders as well. The report points to several developments happening at the same time. Russia has intensified provocations against NATO countries. Its naval and intelligence activities have expanded across European waters. Information campaigns targeting the Baltic states have also become more active. At the same time, Russia is facing growing domestic problems. The country is dealing with a worsening fuel crisis, repeated communication outages, internet disruptions, and a range of other internal difficulties. In this context, escalation also serves another purpose. It allows the government to blame internal problems on external enemies and reinforce the narrative that Russia is engaged in a broader confrontation with the West. According to The Independent, if the Kremlin fails to achieve the results it wants before autumn, Putin may be forced to take much more radical steps. Those options could include another large-scale mobilization, the introduction of full martial law, and an even more aggressive transition of the country onto a wartime footing. I understand that assessment. What I don't understand is why anyone believes Putin has to wait until September. From my perspective, those decisions could be made today, based on every objective indicator. The pressure for further escalation has already reached a critical point. Military analyst David Gindelman, for example, argues that Russia is already 3 years late with another wave of mobilization. In his view, it should have happened back in 2023. Whether that's true or not is open to debate. But the reality is that the groundwork now appears to be in place. All that's missing is the final order. Pilot mobilization exercises have already taken place, not only in the Penza region, but, according to multiple reports, similar preparations are now being tested in other parts of the country as well. In several regions, including Moscow, closed-door meetings have reportedly been held involving officials from the Interior Ministry, the Federal Security Service, and other security agencies. The purpose of those meetings is said to be preparation for a possible mobilization campaign. If those reports are accurate, the decision could come at virtually any moment. Some believe the order could arrive tomorrow. Others suggest the final deadline falls somewhere between now and October. Interestingly, that timeline closely matches the conclusion I reached through my own analysis. I've repeatedly argued that another mobilization was most likely to happen sometime between early July and the end of September. After that, launching a large-scale mobilization would make far less military sense. Sending newly mobilized troops into winter operations would dramatically reduce their effectiveness. Cold weather creates additional logistical burdens, longer training cycles, and significantly higher casualties among poorly prepared personnel. From a purely military standpoint, the earlier such a decision is made, the more practical it becomes. Yet no final decision appears to have been made. Every report coming out of Moscow points to continuous meetings around Putin, but none of them seem to produce a definitive conclusion. For now, it appears the Kremlin is still weighing its options. We'll see what happens next. At the very least, this situation reminds us that not every card available to the Russian government has been played yet. That also raises another question. The West continues moving toward a strategy of gradual escalation with Russia, yet it still lacks the military strength to fully support that approach. To me, that's an extremely risky gamble. The entire strategy still depends overwhelmingly on the United States. But judging by Donald Trump's recent remarks in Ankara, he doesn't appear eager to become deeply involved in the war again. The closer I examine the latest announcements about Western assistance to Ukraine, the more they look like political commitments rather than entirely new resources. Take the roughly $80 billion in support announced during the recent NATO summit. Most of the funding expected for this year isn't actually new money. Instead, it's largely a redistribution of aid that had already been promised under previous programs. As for next year, the picture remains unclear. But judging by current trends, Ukraine could face much the same situation again. That raises an obvious question. The West certainly has the financial capacity to support Ukraine. Money itself isn't the main obstacle. Yet despite those resources, the funding issue hasn't truly disappeared. The same pattern appears in discussions about air defense. We've already talked about the widely publicized announcements claiming that Ukraine would manufacture Patriot missile systems. In reality, that's not what's happening. The current plan is for Germany to produce Patriot systems and then transfer them to Ukraine. That's a very different story. I pointed that out from the very beginning. The headlines sounded much bigger than the actual policy. And once you separate the political messaging from the practical details, the gap becomes impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, the situation around Iran is becoming increasingly dangerous. The Strait of Hormuz has effectively been shut down once again, following U.S. strikes on Iran and Tehran's retaliatory attacks, including missile and drone strikes targeting Persian Gulf states, as well as attacks on vessels attempting to transit the Strait of Hormuz. Commercial shipping has dropped sharply. As of today, only 8 merchant vessels have passed through the northern Iranian traffic corridor since Sunday. According to ship tracking data, a few ships attempted to use the southern route near Oman. According to these reports, they came under Iranian attack. After that, the number of ship owners willing to take the same risk declined dramatically. The United States continues insisting that the strait remains open. U.S. Central Command says commercial traffic can safely use the southern route. President Trump has made similar statements. But tanker operators are responding very differently. They're simply choosing not to sail. Qatar has also warned LNG carriers about the risks of transiting the Strait of Hormuz, urging them not to endanger their vessels or crews. Where does this lead? Everything depends on one factor: time. The impact of closing the Strait of Hormuz is never immediate. Its consequences grow gradually. The longer the disruption lasts, the greater the pressure on global energy markets. At the same time, Iran faces a serious problem of its own. The world has already begun adapting to repeated disruptions in the strait. Energy markets increasingly assume that more than roughly 10 or 11% of global oil supplies are realistically at risk. Governments and energy companies are already developing alternative routes to reduce their dependence on Hormuz. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have accelerated plans for new pipeline networks designed to bypass the strait entirely. Some projects remain in the design phase. Others are moving steadily toward construction. And once those alternatives are completed, Iran's strategic leverage could become significantly weaker. China has also played an unexpected role in this situation. During the years of conflict and instability in the Gulf region, Beijing managed to significantly reduce its dependence on certain oil supplies. In doing so, China helped stabilize global energy markets and even exported its own refined fuel products to neighboring countries. So yes, the Strait of Hormuz is important. The United States has compared it to an economic atomic bomb. But there are 2 important points. First, its impact is not unlimited. Second, the longer this crisis continues, the clearer it becomes that Iran's advantage may only be temporary. Over time, Gulf oil producers are likely to expand. alternative export routes through pipelines, and other infrastructure projects. These routes may be more expensive, but they offer one major advantage. They bypass Iranian control completely. There are no Iranian restrictions, no Iranian fees, no risk of a sudden blockade. At the same time, a prolonged U.S. pressure campaign against Iran creates a completely different challenge for Tehran. Unlike some other countries, the Iranian government is heavily dependent on oil revenue. The regime needs money not only to maintain the economy, but also to support its security structures. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and other state institutions require constant financing. For Iran's leadership, oil exports are not simply a source of income. They are the foundation of the entire system. The domestic economy has been struggling for years. The government has not been able to rely on internal economic activity as a stable source of revenue. Without oil exports, the pressure on the Iranian leadership increases dramatically. That is why the situation around the Strait of Hormuz is dangerous for both sides. For the United States, the immediate consequences are already creating economic and strategic problems. But for Iran, the longer the blockade continues, the greater the potential damage becomes. And this explains the current pattern. Iran continues pushing harder by threatening or restricting movement through the strait. Meanwhile, Trump is avoiding a full-scale war scenario. He is trying to keep at least part of the route open while continuing military pressure on Tehran. At the same time, Trump is trying to avoid accusations inside the United States that he surrendered, lost the conflict, or failed to achieve his objectives. Those accusations are becoming louder. But the reality is clear. The world today is in a more unstable position than it was before the military campaign. And that raises a simple question. What exactly did the United States achieve after weeks of airstrikes against Iran? What was the strategic purpose of the operation? From this perspective, Trump has very limited options. He is likely to continue with the same approach, maintaining pressure, but avoiding a complete escalation into a full-scale war. Otherwise, politically, the situation could become extremely difficult for him. As a result, the Middle East is likely to remain trapped in this unstable state of neither war nor peace for a significant period of time. And this prolonged uncertainty will eventually force global markets to adapt. Energy companies, governments, and traders will continue searching for ways to reduce dependence on the Strait of Hormuz. The longer the crisis lasts, the more permanent these adjustments may become. Another important development has emerged from Ukraine. Ukraine's ambassador to the United States, Olga Stefanishina, has resigned, citing family reasons. However, there is another side to this story. She has also been connected to a criminal investigation involving allegations of misappropriating approximately 2.5 million hryvnias in state funds. But the more interesting part is the political background. According to reports, American officials had been unhappy with Stefanishina for some time. Trump had reportedly wanted her removed earlier, but President Zelensky did not take that step. Now, she is finally leaving her position. And this happened after Ukraine's National Anti-Corruption Bureau, an institution often viewed as closely connected with Western influence, prepared accusations against her. This shows that even while major political battles continue between Washington and Kiev, smaller pressure points are still being used. However, when it comes to larger political decisions, Trump still appears to have limited influence over Zelensky. Another major development is taking place across Europe. Several countries are now moving toward a stricter approach regarding Ukrainian citizens who are eligible for military service. Estonia has decided not to provide temporary protection status to Ukrainians who fall under military service obligations. In Germany, Chancellor Friedrich Merz has also stated that Ukrainian men who are required to defend their country should return and do so. Poland has made similar statements, arguing that Ukrainian citizens who are subject to military service should be sent back to Ukraine. A broader trend is beginning to emerge across Europe. Governments that previously emphasized humanitarian protection and support for refugees are now increasingly discussing the need to return military-age men. The argument is straightforward. Ukraine has suffered significant losses in manpower, and many potential soldiers are currently outside the country. Returning these people could strengthen Ukraine's military resources and allow Kyiv to continue fighting longer. For European governments, This also buys additional time to expand their own defense capabilities and prepare for possible future security challenges. At the same time, the situation raises difficult questions about migration policy, human rights, and the balance between individual protection and national security interests. Recently, claims have appeared suggesting that Ukraine has already lost around 5 million people. I looked into these reports, but many of the numbers being circulated appear questionable and are based on unclear sources. I won't spend time analyzing exaggerated figures. However, one thing remains clear. Ukraine's mobilization potential is becoming increasingly limited. This is something we have discussed many times before. The problem does not require inflated statistics. A significant number of people, especially those who could potentially serve in the military, are already outside the country, and that creates a serious challenge for Ukraine's ability to sustain a long war.